Thank you everyone for coming out today, and really happy to be here. A lot of times I tell people I'm Muslim, I'm Arab, I'm Syrian, I'm a woman, which means people like to talk about my identities a lot, but never really want to hear from me. So I'm actually I asked to go last because I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to share, and I'm gonna go a little personal because I think personal stories are also a way to think about things. So I think Maha gave us a very great overview in terms of how, we're not talking, Islamophobia is not new under Trump, even though a lot of people are becoming aware of Islamophobia as a problem, which is great, and people coming out, for example, to the airports after Muslim ban and Muslim ban 2.0 then, and a lot of people saying that this is wrong, and that's a wonderful thing, and how do we then take this energy to be like, okay, let's look at the bigger picture and how we need to push things. And Sue is using a very clear example of what's happening right here locally in Montgomery County with this CVE program that's obviously a government-inspired program. But long before, obviously, Trump, and even long before 9/11, these issues were facing Muslim communities. So I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, where there is a large Palestinian and Syrian community. And growing up, I always knew, and the community always knew, there were informants at our mosques and at our schools. And this was just something that we just knew. And this is, again, pre-9/11. And I think that's where we're thinking about in terms of what we're talking about when people say, well, it's justified because there's terrorist attacks, and obviously the United States had to like, what do you expect the U.S. to do? Like, when they're attacked, they have to respond in a certain way, and they were attacked by Muslims, so obviously Muslims are going to be the times out. Well, that doesn't, again, explain why, I, growing up in the 90s, had to deal with the fact that there were informants in my community. I had friends whose parents were put on trial and found guilty of terrorism because of doing nothing else than providing charity to their families back home. I have friends whose also families where just like they just disappeared. They didn't know. They had no idea. One day they were in the neighborhood. The next day we never saw them ever again. We knew in the community where it was just like you knew that there were cars parked around like outside someone's house, and you could tell, yeah, that's someone spying on us. And then 9/11 happened. So 9/11 happens, we're already, aware of informants and etc. 9/11 happens, and at the time, I was 15. I was no longer in the same community I was growing up, going to school every day, but then that community was very much, again, there was a mosque, 2 Islamic schools, a lot of security had to be brought in because people were threatening the school got a bomb threat. The day of 9/11, my siblings were there, they had to come home, etc. But post 9/11, it started then, we would hear in the news again and again, oh, those Muslims, they hate us. They hate us for our freedom. Why don't Muslims condemn terrorism? Islam is inherently violent. Islam is inferior to other religions. And this became the normal sense of conversation all across the political spectrum. I think a lot of times we like to think things of like, oh, well, Donald Trump is a right-wing Islamophobe, and even if like the US government, we're talking like, well, the government, yeah, it needs to be, the policies needs to reform, but we can understand that it takes time to reform these, but we don't understand how ingrained it is in our day-to-day lives, hearing messages that dehumanize Muslims. And even for people in the audience today. So when people say things like, well, we need to save Muslim women, people in this audience might not see why that is a problem. People who will call themselves liberals may not see why that's a problem, or they'll call themselves progressive. So again, that's how ingrained it is, the idea that Muslims have problems that are different and separate from other people, and that we, the civilized people, need to then help those Muslims out. We think about it in terms of the shows we watch on television. Imagine what it means for kids watching on television where all they see of Muslims on TV is that they're terrorists. The show Homeland is probably the biggest example. Or Tyrant. Like these shows that constantly are telling people, yeah, those Muslims are terrorists. And you can do whatever you want in terms of coming out and saying, no, Islam is not violent, this is what Muslims teach, etc., etc. But when that's so ingrained in the media and how you're growing up and getting that information, it's hard to just with one like, oh, just meet a Muslim and that will all go away. And I think understanding what Maha was saying in terms of this is all part and parcel of one big systematic issue. The media is obviously serving the greater idea of the United States needs to be constantly at war, needs to be constantly vigilant. We went from like a war on drugs to a war on terrorism, and the war on terror, that means you always need to have the enemy. And the enemy always has to be those Muslims, and how do you continue to force people to be scared is you always flash these messages of, well, Muslims are terrorists, Muslims want you dead, there are good Muslims, and then we try, so be not completely, obviously the right wing will tell you all Muslims are bad, but then the more liberal version of that is the good Muslim versus the bad Muslim. So the good Muslim is obviously the one who will come and talk to you about how the US government is actually amazing. The US government, compared to the rest of the world, is truly the free land, and those Muslims who are critiquing US government, they're actually bad. They're on the path to becoming the terrorists that, CVE needs to come in and rescue us from that. And again, in terms of like thinking about how it's not only the right wing, if we look at someone like Bill Maher, for example, and his show, you watch Bill Maher, and Bill Maher likes to consider himself a progressive, even though he says a lot of racist things all the time, but especially on the issue of Islamophobia, where people give him a blank because he'll say things, he'll have well-known Islamophobes on his program, like Ayan Hirsi Ali. He'll talk about how, yeah, Muslims need to condemn terrorism, all this idea of like collective punishment, etc., etc. But because he does it again in a veneer of, well, yeah, obviously hate crimes against Muslims are bad, but we'll accept that. Or during the elections, a lot of focus was obviously on the Republican parties, and they were competing in terms of who can be the most Islamophobic amongst them. But that meant people like Hillary got a lot of less attention of her Islamophobia. So at the DNC, when Bill Clinton goes up there in his speech and talks about we, Muslims, who want to be part of our fight, who want to tell us and spy on their fellow Muslims and tell us when Muslims are being treasonous or when Muslims are committing bad acts, those are the Muslims we want to work with. We welcome you in that. So again, this idea of you as a Muslim, you have extra challenges as a citizen of the United States than any other person has, just because you're a Muslim and somehow or another you must have a special connection to other Muslims and know when, oh, this Muslim might be committing something wrong, so I must report them. So I think that's kind of thinking about how it's not only about the right wing, how it's all ingrained, and even beyond just like just 9/11 and how that terrorism. Specifically on what a lot of my work has been around in terms of, especially in post 9/11. So 9/11 happens and a lot of people start talking about Muslim communities do a lot of interfaith work post 9/11 and continues to do interfaith work as a way, I think a lot of people think naturally that's the way you kind of fight these things. It's just like, well, you bring in faith communities, everyone's concerned about their faith and how it's important, and that's a way to kind of deal with these issues of people needing to get to know each other. A lot of times, though, what happens with interfaith dialogues is it tends to focus very much on the interpersonal issues that we've discussed in terms of like the only reason people don't know the reason people hate Muslims is because they just don't know Muslim or they just don't know enough about Muslims. So the burden then becomes on us as Muslims to come and teach the people who are not Muslims about, no, don't worry, our religion is peace. Don't worry, we don't oppress a Muslim woman. I'm a Muslim woman, I'm not oppressed, look at me. So it's all this like showcasing of how Muslims are human, like proving the need to prove ourselves as human. Please do not hate me. Please do not think I'm what is shown in the media. And this is the problem of a lot of times this interfaith work is that it faith washes what the real issues are. The issues are no longer, again, that the media is sending out these messages, that the United States is at war with Muslim majority countries across the board, that there's Guantanamo, that there's CVE, that there's torture. Those are not the issues. The issues are you Muslims are the problem. You Muslims need to prove to us that you are worthy of acceptance. And how you do that? Again, you prove that you're peaceful, you prove that you're the good Muslims. And that entire thing is, again, is a form of Islamophobia. And we don't like to think about it that way because, frankly, that's how a lot of us think about dealing with the issue of Islamophobia in our day-to-day lives. Like, just get together and meet your fellow neighbors and break bread. And I'm not saying any of that are wrong. It's just when it becomes the burden is putting on the Muslims to prove themselves worthy of your respect and worthy of being humans. And especially, and I think it becomes also an issue when it comes, when you're dealing with the political issues that need to be dealt with. When we're talking about, when you're having these interfaith, I've been in I would be good interfaith meetings where it's just like, oh, in the middle of the US dropping bombs on a country, that's too political for our discussions. We're not going to discuss that. And a refusal to deal with that issue because that's political, as if there's some sort of difference and disconnect between the political and the personal, when the whole reason we are having these problems is a political issue. As Liana mentioned, I work at the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights, so it really becomes very significant in terms of Palestine work a lot of times, where there's a refusal to deal with the issue of Palestine because we're too afraid of messing up interfaith relationships, whether it's relationships between Muslims and Jews or relationships between Christians and Jews. It's like, no, we can't touch that issue because we do not want to make people upset. And that's part of, and that then is able to we use interfaith relationships to shut down any political activism. And then when a Muslim might come out and say, I don't agree with that, we can then go back and say, use that label of, well, you're the bad Muslim. Are you sure you want to be the bad Muslim? And that bad Muslim has consequences, very real consequences in terms of when we're talking about the issues of CVE, when we're talking about entrapment, when we're talking about surveillance, then you're all of a sudden put on the radar's flag for whoever is a part of the FBI in this room today, like, oh, that's the person that we need to be watched. That's the person that's going to be causing us problems. And all because someone decides to practice their First Amendment right to free speech. So I'm hoping that, thinking about how we kind of move forward in your day-to-day, because a lot of times people think like, oh yeah, US policy is wrong, okay, yeah, we'll fight back that CVE, but there's that very, on the level of like when you're talking to your fellow neighbors, when you're talking to your families, when these images come up on TV, do you see those images and just say, okay, yeah, that's bad? Do you think about, what are my grandchildren watching? What are my children watching? Do they know when they go home, when they have their Muslim neighbors, like their Muslim classmates, like how they're dealing with this? I had my brother's, and I'll end on this last story. My brother is 13 years old. He goes to an Islamic school, and after Trump won, he called me, and he's like, am I supposed to be afraid now? And so thinking in terms of like, that's a reality that more and more Muslims are facing every single day, and what is the responsibility that people have to deal with that issue, and making sure that that Muslims are not just so dehumanized the way we talk about them, even within our liberal progressive spaces, but obviously in the media, and making sure that really amplifying the stories of Muslims is extremely important as well. So thank you so much.